mentioned that we have different kind of participles. Do you remember how many kind of participles did we mention last class?
Three kind?
Yes.
Again, please.
Three kind?
Yes, three different kinds of participles. We
Past, present, and perfect?
Yes, very good. So we said that the participle was a word form uh, that form from a verb, right? And we say that we have the present participle, the past participle, and the perfect participle, right? And we are going to use this participle to form these cause effects with participles, okay? So something that we need to have clear is that we can use participle clauses when the participle and the verb in the main clause have the same subject, okay? For example, here we have, waiting for Ellie, I made some tea, okay? As you can see, the subject in these two clauses is the same. While I was waiting for Ellie, I made some tea, okay? So remember, we need to have the same subject in these two clauses, okay? Then it says participle clauses don't have a specific tense. The tense is indicated by the verb in the main clause. Remember that we have two clauses in these participle clauses. Okay, we have the first and the second clause. So as you can see, the first clause is in the past. So the second clause is also going to be in the past. Okay, let's see here. And then we have the next one. It says participle clauses are mainly used in written text, particularly in literary, academic, or journalistic style. So this is something that is very formal, okay? So we are going to talk about the general rules that we discussed last class, okay? So it says, when the clause starts with because, since, or as, and it has an action verb, what do we need to do to reduce this sentence to the participle sentences? What do you do to reduce the sentence to the participle sentences? ¿Recuerdan? ¿Lo tienen en su libro?
We have to use the auxiliary have
And
the verb in a participle way.
yes, very good. So when we have the clauses with because, since, and as, and we have an action verb, remember that we have to use the verb have with the ing form and the past participle form of the verb. So the perfect participle, right? So do you remember what is an action verb? Last class, we talked a little bit about action verbs. What is an action verb? What do you remember about action verbs? What is this?
The
How can you?
verbs who perform an action, doing
Oh,
verbs.
okay, yes. These are called action verbs or dynamic verbs, okay? And these are the ones that describe an action. Remember, we said last class that some of the action verbs that we have in English are walk, talk, eat, read. All these verbs describe an action, right? So these are action verbs, okay? So for example, since she studied hard, Dana had no problems in the test. Okay, so as you can see, we have the verb studied, okay? It's in the past and is an action verb. It describes an action, right? So as we have an action verb, we need to use this structure that we have here, okay? So how can you change this verb? How can you reduce this sentence here? What can you say?
Having studying hard.
Having
Yes. having studied hard, Dana had no problems in the test, right? Okay, so this is the rule for, this is a general rule for the action verbs. Then we are going to talk about the non-action verbs. Give me a second. We are going to talk about the non-action verbs. Okay. So it says when the clause has a non-action verb. What do we need to do when the verb is a non-action verb? Do you remember?
We write the
Start
verb in a participle way.
Okay. In which of the
ing
three?
form.
Yes, in the ing
Present verb with ing.
present participle, right? Very good. So we use the present participle. The present participle is the verb with the ing form, right? So do you remember what is a non-action verb? Last class we talked a little bit about non-action verbs.
Verbs who describes the things, feelings, or
Anybody else? What is a non-action verb?
It's a verb that express a state or condition.
Okay, yes, very good. A non-action verb, these are called non-action verbs or stated verbs or state verbs too. Okay, these are the ones that don't describe an action. Okay, for example, they describe a state or a condition, as you said, right? For example, they describe possession, the senses, opinion, emotion, okay, these kind of things. Okay, for example, here we have own, believe, see, or desire. Okay, and we have a lot of examples about non-action verbs. Okay, so these are the non-action verbs. For example, here we have, can you read the example, please, Fabiana?
Yes, because parents worry about the effects of violent music lyrics, they often protest products with offensive content.
Okay, as you can see, here we have a verb that is worry. What does this verb express? What does this verb describe?
a
A
feeling or
condition.
thinking.
Emotion.
Yes, describe a feeling, right? Emotion. He feels, this person or these people feel worry, right? A feeling, right? So it's a non-action verb, right? So that's why we use the present participle form to reduce this sentence. Okay, so what can we say here? How can we change this sentence?
Worrying about the effect of violent music lyrics.
Yes, very good. So we can say worrying about the effects of violent music lyrics. They often protect, instead of say they, here we can say parents, right? Parents protest products which with offensive content, okay? So as you can see, if we have a verb that is a non-action verb, we can start the sentence like this, worrying, okay? But we have an exception that we mentioned last class. Do you remember what was the exception for the non-action verbs?
When a non-action verb turns to an action verb, like thinking.
Okay. You are talking about the non-action verbs that express other things. Okay.
No, when a non-action verb turns to an action verb, like think turns to thinking, the action of
Okay, you are talking about that some action verbs, sometimes they become action verbs, right? So yes, it's according to the meaning of your sentence, okay? Okay, yes. But we have here in your book an exception for non-action verbs. Do you remember? No? Okay. It says, when the clause has a non-action verb, we normally use the present participle, right? This is the general rule, okay? But when the first clause, remember that we had a first clause and a second clause. When the first clause has a verb that is a state or condition, and this state or condition began before the verb in the second clause, in this situation, we can use having plus the verb in the past participle, okay? And in the second clause, we have a state or condition that began after the verb in the first clause, okay? So in this one, we have a verb that starts before, a state or condition that starts before, and in this clause, we have a verb or a state or condition that starts after the first one, okay? So this is the exception for the non-action verbs. For example,
teacher. I don't understand.
okay, we are going to do this example with the same sentence we have in the previous example, okay? Here we have, because parents worry about the effects of violent music, they prohibited their children to listen to this kind of music. Okay, so here we have two actions. Okay, in the first we have worry, and in the second part we have prohibited. Okay, so this is something that happened first, and this is something that happened after the first action or the first state or the first condition. Okay, that's why we are going to use this structure. Okay, for example, having worried about the effects of violent music lyrics, they prohibited their children to listen to this kind of music. So this is the exception, okay? Let's see the example that you have here in your book. As you know, like is a non-action verb, right? But this is something that happened first, happened before this action that we have here. Okay, it says, because I have always liked the Beatles, I am thrilled that some radio stations still play their music. Okay, so we use having always liked the Beatles, I am thrilled that some radio stations still play their music. Okay, entonces esa es la condición que tenemos. Dice, however, but if the verb in the first clause expresses a state or action that began before the state or action expressed by the verb in the second clause, the verb is generally reduced by using the auxiliary have. ¿Ok? Entonces seguimos estas dos reglas. La primera para action verbs, la segunda para non-action verbs. Y aquí dice, pero si tenemos un verbo que empieza primero que el otro, primero que el que tenemos en la segunda parte de nuestra oración, podemos utilizar esta regla con non-action verbs. ¿Ok? Porque like is a non-action verb. It expresses a feeling, right? ¿Ok? Entonces esa es la excepción que podríamos tener con los non-action verbs. ¿Ok? Then we have some exercises from your book, from your workbook. I want you to go to your workbook so we can check them.